What are your best examples of people exhibiting the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is when people are too ignorant to understand why they're wrong? I fix boats for a living, and I can tell you there's probably no subject in existence where everyone knows better than you than boats and boating. To quote someone on a repair, "No, that's way too much for the work here. Tell them their deck is rotten from years of water seeping in? No, you're wrong. I take very good care of my boat. It's actually crazy." I called for a service on my AC, the guy comes out, says everything was fine and it was working in that moment, so I pay the fee and he leaves. 3 weeks later, the unit fails and I call another company to have a look. I was giving the story to the tech and I said something like, "The other guy tested everything, but that doesn't mean a component didn't fail after he left and before you showed up." And this guy was startled. He told me very few people understand that can and does in fact happen. Well, I work in IT and have had to have this discussion many times with people. When I was in high school in the 70s, I thought that I was a good singer. I sang in a couple of bands. Later, I built a recording studio and worked with bands, learning more and more about music. The more I learned, the less good I believed I was, but I kept practicing for years. A few years ago, I took vocal lessons from an excellent teacher. I believed I was close to being a good singer and just needed some minor tweaks, and he showed me how far away the goalpost really was. Looking back to high school, I sucked while believing I sounded good. My dad thinks he's the man at day trading and the real estate market because he once managed to make money on both of those. So he keeps buying more stocks, and he keeps making plans to become a real estate agent. He buys self-wealth books and buys into pyramid schemes. He has no certifications. Now he's in debt because of bad trades and pyramid schemes, but he's still convinced he's going to turn it around and become rich. Yeah, I've always been a little cynical and assumed that even if you had good instincts for the stock market, it's still risky, but it definitely sounds like what your dad is doing is just straight-up gambling in all but name. The guy needs help. My boss, who got fired for unrelated reasons. A few years ago, this guy, who's the stepson of the company's founder, president, and CEO, was made national director of sales. He was out visiting one of our job sites where we were building a new location and started talking to the superintendent and project manager. I heard this story from the superintendent himself, and I 100% believe this is true because the guy is a nightmare and the superintendent is a badass whose specialty is dealing with idiots. Also, the CEO basically confirmed the whole thing on a phone call 2 weeks later. So this idiot was saying, "Why do these buildings take 8 months to build? You should be able to do them in 5. The supervisor says, "The plans are for 7.5 months, with a few weeks thrown in as safety for weather, subs that don't show up, supply delays, among other things. We can't build them in 5 months. If absolutely everything goes right, we might be able to do them in 7. That's ridiculous. Just schedule things tighter and make it happen faster." That's not possible. I've been building these things for the company for 6 years now, and we absolutely cannot do it in 5 months. Look, just put me in charge and I'll get it done. You'll see. I've been working in construction for 30 years. You've never worked construction a day in your life. You have no idea what you're talking about. The guy at this point starts fuming, screaming, and making a complete butt out of himself. "How dare you say that to me? You have no idea. What gives you the right?" "Because it's true. Now get off my job site before I call the cops." Obviously, dimwit boss went crying to his daddy almost immediately. Luckily, his stepdad is actually smart and level-headed. Apparently, the conversation went something like this. "The superintendent said I have no idea what I'm talking about because I've never worked construction and he threatened to call the cops on me if I didn't leave the job site." And the CEO answered, "Well, he's right. You haven't even swung a hammer before. And what were you doing there anyway?" The CEO then banned him from visiting the construction sites ever again. A random person started debating me about the statistical significance of the work I was doing. He's studying philosophy while I'm studying statistical science. I did do him the respect of paying attention to him because there's always a possibility that I've made a mistake, but that wasn't the case. I work for a financial institution, so I have too many examples to count. Mostly people that try to argue math when it's done by our system automatically. Both my brother-in-law and his now ex-wife. He thinks he's going to retire in 10 years. He's in his 20s without a degree. Even billionaire tech startup geniuses don't retire 10 years after their 20s. She can't figure out how people know so much about the shenanigans she's pulling with her custody agreements, denying my brother-in-law time with his child, among other things. She thinks she's blocked everyone in the family on everything, but then she lets strangers add her on Instagram all the time and she publicizes her wrongdoings there. Yesterday I got into it with a guy who was raging that the new iPhones don't have cameras with, quote, more megapixels. Well, I design consumer electronics for a living, including some with cameras, so I mentioned that having more megapixels doesn't automatically mean the resulting image will be better. I pointed out that there are many factors that go into making a camera produce better images, and that the number of pixels is only one of them. I also pointed out that if you don't improve the other things along with the pixel count, increasing the pixels can actually produce a worse image sometimes. Well, he wasn't having it. To him, more meant better, no matter what. Decades of customer electronics industry experience couldn't hold a candle to his observation of, 10 is better than 20, duh. Unfortunately, most people don't want to learn anything from anyone who might be aware that they're sharing new information. I got lucky sometime in my teens when I realized that anyone who is accurately correcting me is giving me the gift of replacing something incorrect in my thoughts with something that is correct. My elder brother asked me for a copy of the Bible once. I said that I had a couple of them I'd inherited and asked which one he'd prefer. He asked, well, is it Old or the New Testament? I was like, it's both of them. Well, that's stupid, he said. They're the same thing. He said this very confidently. It turned out he thought the New Testament was just the Old Testament in updated language, like reading Beowulf in modern English, and it was surprisingly hard to convince him that he was wrong. He was so confident about this ridiculous statement that remembering it makes me laugh to this day. I kinda hope that someone listening to this also got their minds blown by this fact. I can see why he was confused about that if he was coming from a place of ignorance, but fighting over your error when you just clearly don't know from the outset is what makes him a dummy here. We resent baselessly defending something that you know nothing about, not ignorance. I feel like a lot of the smartphone wars from back in the day were just people reading off spec sheets at one another without either person knowing what they were saying. My coworker who ignores every stated protocol for someone with his job description. All he's required to do is gather the data to be entered about the customer. Each time he tries to enter the data himself, he hasn't been trained for this. Why? Because he's computer illiterate at age 68. The customer can wait 4 to 24 hours for the data entry to gain them normal customer access to our business. There's nothing immediately necessary for the customer. I've complained, he gets mad, he's quit, and then he's come back. He kept doing it. Boss does nothing. Meanwhile, to fix his mistakes takes 48 hours longer, bothers the IT person, creates more work for more departments, and the client has now received poor customer service. I mean, it's protocol for this very reason. Last time he did that, our entire department and the IT guy refused to help him fix his mistake. The customer repeatedly came in on his shift and asked why the perks weren't set up yet. This coworker of mine then yelled at me, "What was the problem with it?" And I calmly said, "I don't know, Bob. I'm supposed to be the only person who's supposed to contact IT. This situation happens when another coworker doesn't follow protocol. I guess you need to figure it out yourself." He walked away and in front of customers yelled, "Frick that. I fricking won't comply. It's customer service." The customers were shocked. I filed a formal complaint on him for disturbing customers. Guess what? He now complies. I post on the Out of the Loop Reddit a lot, which means I invariably have to deal with people who have, let's say, an opposition to reality. The most recent note on one of my posts was a complaint that I included too many facts and sources as a way of confusing people. For real, the argument was that I was providing so much evidence that conflicted with their worldview that I was obviously just lying to them, so I couldn't be trusted. How do you even argue with that? A coworker argued to me that he's not racist, he's just prejudiced towards certain races. I told him that's the literal definition of racist, and he said it's different. Tax brackets. In the US, personal income tax has always been a progressive tax, meaning that as one earns more, one pays a higher percentage, and it's designed in such a way that earning more never results in a net loss to the earner. Plenty of people insist that going into a higher tax bracket can and does cause a net loss to the individual. That's not only untrue now, it's been untrue for as long as there's been personal income tax in the United States. I know a guy who's told me he's against gay marriage because the Bible says it's wrong, but his reasons for being against it aren't religious. What?
Actually, the amount of people who don't understand what the Dunning-Kruger effect actually describes but use the term all the time anyway.
I work at a car dealership and people honestly have no fricking clue what they're talking about when it comes to their vehicles, but they'll always swear they know more than you. My favorite is when they say, "Well, I read on a forum that it's X, so why are you telling me it's Y?" Or, "Well, my mechanic said that it's in good condition." You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. My coworker is convinced that aspartame causes brain cancer, and when I told her it didn't, she asked me how I was sure I was right. I informed her I have a degree in medical technology with a focus in chemical testing. She then laughed at me and told me I was way out of my league because chemistry and food science are different fields of study. She has a 30-year-old degree in social work. We both work the same entry-level position. My mum thinking steam is a virus.
It's only a virus to my wallet.
A very deep south old lady I was talking to once said,
"I'm not racist, I just think they,"
by which she meant black people,
"should stay in their place."
She felt the same way.
"I'm not racist, I only fulfill the exact criteria for racism,"
she says underneath her Confederate flag in the living room of her dilapidated old Southern manor, surrounded by long untended cotton fields. I did accounting for insurance policies. Customers would constantly ask for audits. Nearly every audit was done because the customer was just one payment behind. When I started at the company, I wasn't assigned audits, but was amazed at how many I saw coming through the department every week. Hundreds. Many of them were re-audits of the same policies too. After a couple of months, I got curious, especially because these customers would occasionally get transferred to our department when they became insistent. The first time I saw how my coworkers were auditing, I knew exactly what was wrong. Instead of telling the customer the exact date each payment was received, the audit just stated the month and if a payment was received. So January, yes, February, yes, etc., etc. Not only that, but they had a strict policy of going only 6 months back. Most customers had a due date at the beginning of the month. They'd send their payments out a few days prior, so let's say someone skips a month, possibly years ago, then they continue to send their payments at the end of the month. A payment that was due on the 4th but arrives on the 31st, and the audit will show payment received for that month. But boom, new payment is due 4 days later. I present this to my supervisor and he just did not get it. He kept saying, "But if they paid that month, how are they behind?" Because they skipped a payment at some point possibly years ago, and this has been floating ever since. This isn't advanced stuff. I took over the audits, it didn't even take much extra time. I sent an audit as far back as the late payment to every customer who had a request. We went from 100 audits a week to about 5. My supervisor never figured out how I did it. Worked on a group project as a final exam on my sociology degree. My group consisted of 5 people, myself included. This one guy, you know the kind of guy, he's done great before uni by being a suck-up to teachers. He came across as a very competent guy due to confidence. During the initial process of planning, he'd interrupt everyone saying, with resignation, "I'll just do it if you guys can't." Even though our competence was never really an issue. We made him write the entire chapter of theory, and we had to edit it fully 2 times because he obviously didn't understand it. The project is written in our mother tongue, but almost all the literature was in English. So the majority of the chapter was just quotes from articles, which he couldn't translate or tell the meaning of. He later translated indifference to alienation. He wasn't involved in any data collection and didn't understand basic math. When we explained what the hard data meant, he said that he didn't agree with us and just couldn't see it from our point of view, despite the data not being relative. He still had that "I'm better than you" attitude, and alas, at the exam, me and another student got an A and he got a C. He still thinks he's smarter. My dad absolutely refuses to acknowledge that Finland exists. Even when I show a map to him and show him Finland, he'll adamantly deny it exists. So I work on a service desk, and it's just everyone, really. Saying everyone else is wrong except for you might just be the best unintended example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. This one guy, who's a climate change denier, got into an argument about it with my friend. He ended up saying, "Wow, look at you, you got all liberal. You'll believe anything you read on the internet now, huh?" Please note that my friend was an environmental science major in college. Yeah, my dad told me no hurricanes hit the US for 18 years before Katrina. When I showed him Wikipedia has maps of every hurricane to hit the US since the 1880s, it's pretty cool, he told me he doesn't care what evidence I found on the internet. He shut up when I reminded him we were in Florida for a hurricane in 2002. I know a guy that keeps saying he wants a house that's done, as in well-kept, in great condition, and with some property. He makes $11 an hour and has 3 kids. He won't apply for another job. He keeps renting. All anti-vaxxers and racists I've ever met or heard about are prime examples of the Dunning-Kruger effect. I'm a Mexican girl now working in a tattoo studio as an apprentice. I get to use the place and practice. In exchange, I have to clean it and help with clients. Also, they pay me like $40 a week, and there's this tradition where an apprentice starts in a studio and they have to learn from someone else. Now, the thing is that they've got a lot of trash that shouldn't be on the floor. I'm talking used gloves, used towels, even pieces of metal from piercings and needles. This is contamination and dangerous as frick. In the moment you start a tattoo, you've got to be as clean as possible. At least that's what I thought. So I kindly asked them to throw the biotrash in the trash can, and they took it badly. Since you're the apprentice, you've got to deal with that stuff. And I'm like, can we take a moment to understand that it's not hard to throw some dangerous material where it belongs? I know they're just teasing me, but heck, these aren't Kleenexes, they're towels with blood on the damn floor. Comments 2 through 4 in any video game sub on patch day. As a Helldivers player, I feel this in my soul. Some people really just hate change, and it's baffling to imagine getting that angry about nerfs and balances. I don't think the internet will like this, but an analyst of China named Gordon Chang. He wrote a book called The Coming Collapse of China, in which he explained why China would fall within 5 to 10 years. The book was published in 2001. Shout out to all my colleagues who spent a day training on SQL and Excel and think that they're somehow data engineers. My old roommate talking about how the world was only 6,000 years old and the dinosaurs were wiped out by the Great Flood. I brought up carbon dating and she said it was a myth created by the devil to lead people away from the truth. Remember that episode of Futurama where Leela goes back to that orphanarium and she's like a legit space captain and has good friends and is doing pretty darn great, and she's proud of herself? Meanwhile, all the other people at the reunion are like degenerates and addicts and homeless and crap, but when she tries telling them about her success, they just patronize her and are like, "Oh, that's so good for you. You should be really proud of everything considering you only have one eye." That's how my family treats me, except I have both eyes. To all my peers and myself, I'm successful, but anytime I cross paths with my mum's sisters and brothers and all their offspring, they just patronize me and talk down to me, even though by all rights they have no leg to stand on. They're just miserable people. Jail time, addictions, kids that they didn't want and can't afford, all living in squalor, but apparently because I don't go to church, I'm a moron, and if something happens to me, it's luck. Or someone feeling sorry for me, and that's why I get opportunities, out of pity. The whole thing is bananas. I once had someone explain to me that Superman could be the Man of Steel, but Supergirl couldn't be the Woman of Steel because a uterus couldn't be made of steel, so she wouldn't be able to carry children. I tried explaining that the uterus in Supergirl's body would have the same cell and tissue structure as the organs in Superman's body, but to no avail. From anyone else, I would have assumed that this was an anti-feminist comment, but from this guy, it was just a pure lack of understanding of how the human or superhuman body works. There are professional athletes who are experts in off-season sports moves. This summer, Antonio Brown was convinced he was one of those guys. I'm pretty sure Antonio Brown still thinks he's one of those guys. Antonio Brown is not one of those guys. My brother-in-law tried to convince others that coal was the most beneficial to the environment. As a bartender, I've had customers and staff telling me I'm wrong for doing certain things with drinks. One, floor staff telling me that there was no head on cider that he was bringing for someone. When I told him you don't give cider with a head, he stared at me and kept telling me that you do. And second, a customer just last week complained about getting a lime with her tequila that only lemons go with tequila, and proceeded to drunkenly lecture me which drinks lemon and or lime goes in. In truth, you can use either lemon or lime, I've just been told lime. My mum thinks that using a tanning bed before going on holiday will prevent skin cancer. She then tells me that being an undergraduate doesn't make me smart, and that I can be wrong about things. Any conversation I have with client techs or colleagues about my politics. I'm in a conservative industry, but I'm a leftist, specifically part of the libertarian left, not a big fan of centrally planned economies or authoritarian single-party democracies. Like, they don't even have the